Hey guys, this is Coach Jeff coming at you from CrossFit NOLA Online. This is the first in our series of movement breakdowns. This week we're going to be talking about the air squat. What we're going to do here is demo a really good movement. We're going to show you exactly what we want it to look like to the best of our ability. We're then going to give you some mobility activities that might help you get into good positions during the movement. We'll address some common faults with the movement, and then we will give you some fixes. The fixes can either be quick or they might be implemented over time. And finally, we want you to submit a video of what your squat looks like. We can help you by seeing what you look like, and we can't do that unless you give us the material. So send your squat in, and we will give you some feedback on how to make it better. Let's talk about mobility a little bit. To get ready for a squat, what we need to focus on is a couple things, mainly our hips and our ankles, and sometimes our midline or our thoracic. What we're going to start with is going to be the hips. A couple stretches I like to do, if you've ever done ROMWOD or you come to any of my classes, we do this pose called the lizard stretch, where I have you guys start in a hands and knees position, and we take a big step up and put our hands on the instep. As you guys relax into this, if you can get lower into the stretch and get your elbows to the ground, it's going to really start opening up that hip. We can do this on both sides. And we can even add a little bit more by switching right into a pigeon pose. So I can lay that leg right in front. Again, this is going to be a little bit more rotation, but it's going to really focus on opening up that hip. Once we have the hip open, we want to also work on the front of the hip. Commonly done with a couch stretch, but we can just make it a little bit simpler and just get into a nice tall lunge position. But I want you to make sure we're staying up tall. So if we lean forward, it's going to take pressure off that hip flexor. I want to get deep into that lunge. I want to sit up nice and tall. That's going to put some pressure on the front of that hip flexor, and we can settle in there 20, 30 seconds if we're prepping for a workout. If we're finishing a workout, we can stay in there longer, minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, sometimes even 4 to 5 minutes. Following the hips, what I want to see is the ankles. Ankles are a really commonly overlooked mobility piece. My favorite ankle stretch is starting with a straight leg, blocking that foot up, and I'm going to push my leg or my hip towards the pole. Then I'm going to sit back and I'm going to push my knee towards the pole. The stretch is going to do two things. When we are in the straight leg version, you'll feel a stretch in your calf muscle, which will be your lower leg muscle. And then as we bend the knee and push the knee towards the pole, it's going to give us a stretch in our ankle joint. So I'm not going to feel a muscle pulling necessarily, but I'm pushing my knee and I'm pushing my ankle to end range of motion. Do that probably 20 seconds per movement per side. So 40 to 60 seconds per leg. All right, so what does a good squat look like? Let's start with the stance. We're going to start with a shoulder width stance. This is going to be a little bit outside the hips. Sometimes I like to tell people to point directly down at the ground under the shoulders. That's where your feet are going to start. We're going to keep our eyes forward, and I'm going to lift my hands up in an effort to try and keep my chest a little higher. So as I descend in that squat, my hips are going to go back and down, and I'm going to go down until I get my hip crease below my kneecap. I'm going to keep my eyes on the horizon the entire time. At this bottom position, my knees are tracking out over my toes, and I'm going to stand up to full extension to finish. Again, I'm sending the hips back and down. I'm going to keep the weight on the heels. I'm trying to keep that chest really high, and I'm pushing those knees out. Now that we know what a good squat looks like, let's look at a couple common faults that you guys might see or might be encountering during your movement. A really common one we see is depth. So we see people get set up really, really well, and they never actually get down all the way. Other positions are pretty good, but getting that hip crease below the kneecap is never achieved. Another common one, this is really common for beginners, is awareness of the knees. So we'll see people squat without pushing the knees out. I'll turn so you can see this a little bit. But those knees are going to come in, and I'm not really establishing a good position on the floor. A big one, and this is what I raised my arms to establish when I demoed the good movement, was the lumbar curve. If I am not really active in the lower back and I drop my chest or drop my shoulders, I don't establish that midline position, which is going to be the safe part of every movement. So establishing that lumbar curve or letting the pelvis pull the hips underneath at the bottom is going to be a loss in that lumbar. Finally is staying on the heels. also known as an inappropriate line of action. So if we drop straight down, you'll notice my heels are going to come off the ground. I might be achieving depth right here, but I have a lot of pressure on my knees because I'm not sitting back on those heels. So I'm dropping straight down, my weight is on my toes, not a really strong position at the bottom of the squat. Let's talk about some fixes for the squat. When you guys come to class, the coach is going to give you quick cues oftentimes. We're going to tell you to push your knees out. We're going to tell you to keep your chest higher. We're going to tell you to keep your heels down. We're going to tell you to get lower. Things like that. We're trying to fix your squat to make it look like it did in our demo version. If those aren't working, we have some longer term or therapy type ideas. And I'm going to go through these. There's going to be 4 of them. We'll start with the bottom to bottom. If you're having trouble getting depth, what we're going to do is start you at the bottom. We'll say, get in a good squat stance and get set. Get at the bottom. Your squat will start and end at the bottom. You're going to spend a little bit of time in that bottom position between every rep. A couple sets of 10 of these will really reinforce staying low. We can also use that depth cue by getting an object. Wall ball was the most common, or medicine ball is the most common object for this. We could use a box, or you could use a chair, you could stack up some plates or some yoga blocks or something like that. But the same idea, we want to pull our hips back and down, we want to touch the bottom or touch the ball, and we want to come back up to the top. This is going to help with that depth. It's also going to help you, give you an opportunity to push those knees out during the movement. If you're really having a trouble with the knees caving in, we can block the knees. This can be done with a plyo box. I'm going to use a bench, and I'm eventually going to use a wall, but it does not allow my knees to come forward. If I'm trying to push those knees forward, I'm getting onto my toes. I'm going to line up those feet right with the edge of the bench, and as I descend into that squat, the bench keeps me from sliding forward onto the balls of my feet. It does not, so I'm still sloppy in that position. We need to add one more piece. This is going to be the wall squat. The wall is going to block your knees, and it's also going to keep your chest upright at the bottom, not allow you to lose that lumbar curve. I usually tell people to start 8 to 12 inches away, and I want you to reach up really, really tall. That's going to keep that chest high and allow me to pull myself down into the squat. As you get more comfortable with the movement, we want to try and get closer. You should be able to do this movement if your squat is mature with your toes touching. So again, I'm pulling those hips back and down. And I'm thinking about pulling myself into the bottom of the squat. Again, set to 10. It's a really good warm-up, cool-down activity. Spend some time in the movement to help make those changes long-term. All right, guys, that's going to bring us to the end of our movement breakdown for the squat. We gave you a good movement. We showed you some mobility stuff to get you ready to squat. We showed you some common faults and some fixes. The next step is up to you. We need you to submit a short video of your squat. What we're going to do is post this in the Facebook members page, and the easiest way we think to do this is going to be to comment with a video of your squat to this video. So, short video. Let us see what it looks like. Improving your air squat will improve your back squat, your front squat, and your overhead squat. If you can improve squatting mechanics for the simplest movement, it's going to translate to the more difficult movements. So take some time, let us see what your squat looks like, and stay strong and keep working on your flexibility.